I think, many individuals in the United States, at least, and I suspect elsewhere, have grown complacent. They witnessed what they thought was the end of the Cold War, and they thought that the kinds of risks that we faced during the Cold War no longer exist. I think that's a mistake. I think the nature of a war has changed. But we simply don't adequately appreciate that major risks remain, particularly in the realm of accidental war by mistake, by accident, by miscalculation. There are both technical and political steps that could be taken to reduce the risks of nuclear war. Personally, I'm more concerned about the political aspects. Today, I see the total absence of trust between the United States and the Russian Federation. We don't hear what each other is saying. There is no respect for the positions of the other side. And so I think under those conditions, miscalculations, accidents which in the past might have been averted and would not escalate today, there's a much greater risk that they would lead to the actual use of nuclear weapons in some kind of a conflict. So I'm particularly concerned about the political relationship today between Washington and Moscow. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure that the phrase Cold War is particularly apt today. I think what we can say is that the political relationship between our two countries is at its lowest ebb that I can remember. And I remember, I was a young boy, but I remember the Cold War. I think we see the worst in each other. We fail to recognize that there are common security interests that we face, including preventing the spread of weapons of mass destruction, combating nuclear terrorism. We should be mobilized to collaborate, to cooperate, because it serves both of our countries' interests. We did so during the Cold War, but today we seem to have lost an understanding of the possibility of cooperation in this very important domain. So that's what makes me particularly worried. But I think it certainly should. Objectively, I think it serves both countries' interests. I still retain some hope that rational decision-making will prevail and that we will see an extension of New START. I don't think there is any logic to not extending the treaty. Unfortunately, we increasingly see non-rational actions taking place on almost a daily basis. So I must say I don't have great confidence that it will be extended, but I think it certainly should be. I think the danger of nuclear terrorism remains very high. I think for the most part we have been very lucky to date, but I don't think we can rely on luck to keep us safe in the future. So I think the issue has to remain front and center. Personally, I am less concerned about the potential for a non-state actor to acquire a nuclear weapon or to acquire the material necessary to build a nuclear weapon. I'm more concerned with an issue that has not received much attention, and that's the possibility for terrorists to actually precipitate, to incite a nuclear exchange without them having actually acquired the weapon themselves. I like to think of this in terms of spoofing or deception. And the case that I think of in particular was a real case that occurred in 1995 when there was a scientific rocket launched from Norway. Soviet, or rather Russian command and control initially interpreted that launch as coming from a U.S. submarine-launched ballistic missile, because it was a multi-stage missile that was launched for scientific purposes. And so for at least a short period of time, there was a concern that the United States might have, for whatever reason, have launched this device. Rather quickly, Russian command and control determined that it was not an actual U.S. missile launch. Today, however, were a terrorist to launch a scientific rocket, which they could buy on eBay. I fear that in a crisis situation, one might misinterpret this launch to actually be one involving the United States. And cool heads might not prevail, and there might be retaliation. So a terrorist could actually precipitate a nuclear exchange without even having nuclear weapons. That's if we're talking about the US and Russia. If we look in South Asia, where one could imagine those parties who were not interested in India and Pakistan reducing their tensions, they could also precipitate a nuclear exchange in a similar fashion. And there is, the countries are contiguous, so there's practically no time for decision making. So I worry that a non-state actor could precipitate a nuclear exchange in South Asia as well. Well, I don't think we're in a position to insist on nuclear disarmament for any other country. I think the Chinese have far fewer nuclear forces than do the United States and the Russian Federation. And so while it would be nice to engage China in nuclear disarmament, I think from a practical standpoint, unless or until the United States and Russia more substantially reduce their nuclear arsenals, that there's very little incentive for China to be engaged in the process. I cannot say with much confidence that that will be possible. I think the departure of some key figures, including Mr. Bolton, Mr. Morrison, make it more likely that there may be some meaningful deliberations in the arms control area. But I don't really see a great interest on the part of anyone in the administration today to build or to rebuild this framework of arms control. So while it's not out of the question, I don't think it's very likely in the short term, even though it's in both countries' interests. It's a very, very dangerous situation. I think it was tremendously counterproductive for the United States to withdraw from the JCPOA. I think the remaining parties will find it exceptionally difficult to do the things that will be necessary to keep the JCPOA intact. And while I don't think there are clear indications that Iran has renewed its nuclear weapons program, they are certainly taking steps which make that possibility more likely than it was a year ago. So I think it's very worrisome. I think it's unlikely for the Trump administration to alter its course. And so there is more for Europe and for Russia to do in this regard. But I think the situation will get worse before it gets better, unfortunately. I think there's really no incentive for China to become engaged in this process at this point in time. I mean, it would be nice if one could multilateralize INF, but I have no confidence that the United States really is interested in that developing. I think the calls to bring in China are more an attempt to divert attention from the fact that the United States has withdrawn from the treaty. So I'm very pessimistic about any formal renewal of INF at the moment. Perhaps one can accept the Russian idea of some kind of a moratorium in terms of deployments of INF prohibited systems. I think that's probably the best that we could hope for, but I think that would only involve the United States and Russia. I can't see a third party being involved. No, I think space-based weapons are a particularly dangerous not actually new, but a particularly dangerous technology. There are a number of evolving technologies today involving cyber, involving additive manufacturing, involving increasingly accurate non-nuclear systems. All of these new technologies and developing technologies pose very difficult threats, and we are not well prepared to deal with them. So it would be hard to address the dangers posed by these new technologies. But those technologies become even more dangerous if we dismantle the existing framework of arms control agreements, which have helped us over the past several decades to at least kind of cap the arms race, to have some predictability, to have in place verification measures that give confidence to both sides. So while these existing measures don't necessarily address the new technologies, we certainly are much safer having them in place as we try to develop new means to deal with these new and very dangerous emerging technologies.